possible. I think the room's on a 1-hour timer, so. Excellent. Should I keep going? Okay, great. This event is important for a number of reasons, not least because in the run-up to the district attorney elections of 2020, policies surrounding mental illness have become a front and center issue in discussions of policing and prosecution in Los Angeles. And so we have two panels, we'll have a break in between, that are going to discuss essentially the past and present in the first panel and the future of mental illness policy and practice in the criminal justice system. But to begin our program, I want to extend an especially warm welcome to our honoree today, Patrice Cullors. Ms. Cullors is quite simply a hero to many of us in the Los Angeles and Loyola community. And I have told her a number of times now that it has been an especial ambition of mine to bring Ms. Cullors on campus because it is an important aspect of the social justice mission of this law school, and something that Professor Kennedy and I feel especially deeply about, that this campus be accessible to all members of our community, both our scholarly community of students, staff, and faculty, and that goes in descending order of importance, so students most important, staff then faculty, but also the larger Los Angeles community. It's a goal of Professor Kennedy and I to try and make this campus a place where people who are interested in social justice in Los Angeles can come and use as a forum, one that is hopefully available and accessible to everyone in order to spread the message of social justice as broadly as possible. That way we all benefit, our students, our staff, our faculty, and the broader community. So it is an especially great honor for me to, first of all, welcome Ms. Cullors. I will give her a award and then hand over to Patrice for remarks. So without any further ado, please come up and receive on behalf of LMU Loyola Los Angeles Law School, the Juvenile Law and Policy Award for Public Service and Social Justice, which goes to Patrice Cullors. Okay, so without any further introduction, I think we'll hand over to Patrice for your comments.
I'm going to still this water. Hopefully there's more for the panelists. Thank you so much, Loyola. I really am grateful for this honor. I'm, consistently thinking about what we're going to do about our mental health care system here in Los Angeles County, and have spent the last 20 years of my life both being an advocate for people with severe mental illness, but also trying to figure out the best ways to change the system that we currently live in so we can have an adequate mental health care system. In 1999, my older brother, who was my first best friend, was convicted of joyriding. He was 19 years old, and he ended up in the Los Angeles County jail system. That was my first time having a family member of my knowledge inside the county jail system, someone who I loved and adored, and didn't realize that the next couple years would end up being a nightmare for my family. My brother was brutally beaten by the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department inside of Wayside Pitches Detention Center, and then transferred to Twin Towers Correctional Facility, where he was tortured by the Sheriff's Department. He was starved, he was over-medicated, he was forced to sleep in a cell without a blanket. He remembers recalling having to cover himself in toilet paper so that he could get some sort of warmth. And for 60 days, my mother and I could not find him. This was a common practice of LAUSD, LAS, the LA Sheriff's Department, hiding people inside the jails, even if their family went to go try to visit them, tried to call and check up on them. They told us for 2 months that they couldn't find him. When my brother was found, he was emaciated. He had lost a significant amount of weight, and they had put him on so many psychotropic drugs that he could barely open his eyes. This changed me forever. This changed how I understood our criminal justice system. This changed how I understood how we treat people. And something inside of me at 16 years old said, I'm going to try to make this world better for my brother. Right now, my brother is in a hospital. Someone said to me today, how's your brother? And I said, terrible. He's been on the streets for the last 6 weeks. He's been dumped out of hospitals. He has been treated inadequately by the system over and over and over again. And this award tonight is not one that is just about what I've done for Los Angeles. This award is for my family. It's for my brother. I don't believe the work that I'm doing is done until we have ensured that every single human being inside of Los Angeles County has a home, has the ability to have access to food, has the ability to have access to adequate mental health care. We live in a county that has divested completely from our communities. And I am honored to be a part of a movement that has saying enough is enough. I'm honored to be a part of family members who we spend our days working and fighting for justice, and our evenings working and fighting for our loved ones. And so much of what happens when my brother is in an episode is my mother and I, as his frontline care providers, make sure hospitals keep him, make sure that the police, if they are there on site, that we're recording every single moment that they are interacting with him. And more importantly, I spend my days trying to think about what are going to be the best policies, what is going to be the best cultural work, the best social movements, so that this kind of work that is often heavy, that people really don't want to talk about or think about, that it's work that people understand as necessary work for us. I believe when we take care of those who are severely mentally ill, we are actually creating a safer environment for them and everybody else around them. And so the work isn't done. There are two very important things we need to be thinking about in the next several months. Our DA race, one of the most important elected seats here in LA County. So if you don't know what a DA is, talk to me after this. Well, you'll learn about it, but then also talk to me after this. It is incumbent upon us as Angelenos to step up and ensure that we refuse to have a DA that is not in service of the community. And so it is our work in the next few months to make sure that we have the best candidate possible to move the work that we think is necessary for this county to be the true amazing place that I know it is. And secondly is reform LA jails. Yes. A ballot measure that I'm the chair of, a ballot measure that will really challenge the ways in which we understand who our jail population is, and push for more mental health care, more rehabilitation, and less jailing of those most vulnerable in LA County. So thank you again, Loyola, for honoring not just me, but all of the people who are on the front lines to ensure we live in the safest, strongest, best city and county that it could be. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's now my our panels are going to convene at I think the first one's 6:45. 6:40. So, but before they do, I just want to introduce you to Professor Sean Kennedy. He probably needs no introduction. He is head of our juvenile law and policy clinic. He's been an amazing friend and supporter to me at this law school, especially when times get a little tough and difficult. And he is the person who constantly reminds me, but also our students, that the work of social justice is hard, that needs constant vigilance, and that requires us to challenge ourselves every day to ensure that this is a campus that exemplifies the best of social justice that we can. So, Professor Kennedy.
Okay, we're, Patrice, man, congratulations. So nice to have you here. We're going to take a 10-minute break to assemble our first panel, which is going to talk about the history of mental health policy in LA and how it's become a criminal justice policy instead of a treatment policy. And so we'll start up at 6:40. In the meantime, we have food and drinks for you to celebrate our award winner and talk and network while we get set up. And for those of you who want to ask questions, and it's all about questions, we have cards on the table there. If you could write out your question and hold it up, a Loyola staff member will take it from you and we'll get your questions lined up, because our goal is to have a robust, hard-hitting conversation about mental health policy and what's going on out there. So have some fun for 10, 15 minutes, and then we'll start up our program. Thank you. This? No, I'm fine. Okay, but this should be here? Yes. Okay, ladies and gentlemen. That's why people are here. But we're going to have a great program. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, can we... It's an unruly group who doesn't respond. Thank you. We are going to begin our first panel to start our discussion of upending the current paradigm. And before I introduce our fabulous panelists, I just want to frame the issues of where we have been and how we got here. Since the late 1800s, people suffering from severe mental illness were warehoused in large state hospitals, and deinstitutionalization began in 1963 when JFK, whose sister experienced a lobotomy and was institutionalized, he sought to replace the inhumane state hospital system with federally funded community mental health centers. Unfortunately, the support for community mental health centers, it waned after JFK was assassinated. In 1967, on the state level, Governor Ronald Reagan signed the Lanterman-Pettis Short Act, LPS, which accelerated deinstitutionalization in the state of California. Unfortunately, the act wasn't accompanied by funding or quality alternatives for treatment. Governor Reagan dramatically cut state funding for mental health treatment. And a 1968 California study revealed that the number of people with severe mental illness entering the criminal justice system doubled 1 year after enactment of LPS. Reagan's thoughtless approach became national mental health policy when he became president in 1980. He successfully led the charge to repeal what federal funding remained for community mental health centers. And so this began a decades-long trend, really till the present, of dramatic increases in the number of people with severe mental illness living on the streets of American cities and being prosecuted by the criminal justice system. Of course, the tough-on-crime climate, the war on drugs, of the 80s and 90s increased the emphasis on prosecuting people with mental illness as criminal offenders instead of treating them. So, that's kind of our remarks to start our discussion. And I think we'll start with our panel. We have 4 great panelists. I'm going to just highlight them. And then our format is panelists, I'd like you to make maybe brief comments on the topic, and then we're going to take questions, either from myself or hopefully the audience. So starting at the end, we have Joseph Iniguez, the Deputy DA, who is also running for DA as a progressive prosecutor. Joseph is also a 2012 graduate of Loyola Law School, so welcome home. I'd like to point out that we have George Gascon also in our audience. And then our next panelist is Gilbert Wright, who is the head deputy DA for the Mental Health Division. Actually, I skipped you, Vera, because you changed my placard.
Public defenders are used to being skipped over.
So, Gilbert, we're really happy to have you here. Thank you for being here. Going back, Vera Bradford is the head deputy PD for the Public Defenders Mental Health Diversion Programs. Is that right, Vera?
That's correct.
And finally, Nancy Eng, Nancy, right close to me, my friend who has personal experience with many of these issues and is representing the National Alliance on Mental Illness, which is an organization that has taught me and my students so many things about representing people living with mental illness. So, Nancy, thank you for donating your time to be here. So, Joseph, why don't we start with you and go down the line?
Thank you for having me. Can everyone hear? A couple things I want to say. So I've been a deputy DA for about 5 years. Before that, I was a defense attorney. So I've had the unique perspective of looking at both sides of the criminal justice system, or more recently what we're referring to as the criminal legal system. One of the things that I've noticed is that, police officers are the only first responders when a person is experiencing a health crisis. So for any other health crisis, let's say you've had a heart attack or some other debilitating moment, you'll have other responders. But when somebody is in a moment of psychosis, a police officer is the first one to respond. And these police officers, most of the time, are not equipped to deal with what's happening with that individual. A lot of families have decided early on that they will not call the police if their loved one is suffering from a psychosis. So what you're left with is families trying to manage and figure out what happens. But when police officers are called, I've seen way too many cases that have been filed where clearly the act or the crime that was committed was done in a moment of psychosis, and we haven't dealt with it appropriately. So one of the things I'm interested in this is figuring out how, as the professor mentioned, that going back to the 1800s when we started to realize that mental health was so important that we needed to treat people other than put them in an asylum, how we drifted so far, and how that in 2019 we continue to use the jail as the largest mental health facility, and we allow police officers to be the nation's largest psychiatric team, and we continue to file cases. And that's, as a deputy DA, I've seen too many cases that were filed without the input or knowledge of a mental health professional. The most important moment in the criminal process is the moment of filing, because that will set the tone for what happens next. And so I think that going forward, we can collaborate more with the Department of Mental Health and Social Services to figure out, at that initial crucial moment, what do we do with that individual? And are we providing therapeutic jurisprudence? Or are we just treating them like another defendant in the system heading toward incarceration? So I'm very happy to be here. I'm glad that Loyola is hosting this, my alma mater, and I'm happy to be a part of this panel and answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Vera?
It's always dangerous to have trial lawyers say you only have 5 minutes, because one thing we like to do is talk. And I say that kind of jokingly, but this subject is huge. Gilbert Wright and I today spent from 1 to 3, a short time, on the Alternatives to Incarceration working group, and I see some of you who've come here as well. Because for many years now, we have recognized what Sean said about the crumbling exterior to the jail system, the community system that has failed us in taking care of those who need the most help often as vulnerable individuals with mental health issues, behavioral health issues. And so we've ended up with this massive in LA County, what we have now called a mental health treatment center because the statute was changed. But I want to back up just a sec. Just so you'll understand my perspective, so you can gauge whether you value what I have to say or not. I, too, was a Loyola graduate in '87. I came back and taught trial ad for a year, did some other things. And in the LA County Public Defender's Office, I was a teacher first for over a decade. We saw many students now, in retrospect, that I know had mental health issues, and at the time was somewhat blind to it. In the criminal justice system, having done trials and dealt every day with the travesty of what we have done in California, not just to our mentally ill, but to many people. You know, our jails are burgeoning with individuals whose behavior, not just mental health and mental ill behavior or the result of it, but just whose behavior offends the public, that we are a punishment state and that we lock them up. The terms are grand and overused now of mass incarceration, but it is true. And that's because as a society in California, let's just stick here, we have a punishment mode, and we need to work to change that, and there have been steps. Small steps, but they're steps. And so I preface what I'm just about to say, maybe I should say it after. Change takes time. And I know that's, some of you are quite young. I'm not saying I'm the oldest person in this room, but over time we know that change takes time, and it takes things like this, meetings like this, people like you, moving to make a change. Here's what when we talk about the paradigm change, I often say to myself, what does that mean? What does the paradigm change mean? So I'll give you an example of what it means to me as defense counsel, dealing daily with individuals who are in our system. This is just an obvious example, but if you're in a hospital and you have a brain disease or disorder, and you have been prescribed medication, and somehow you have a bad reaction to it, and you kick the door or you break the mirror, people rush in and they say, oh my gosh, that medication wasn't working. This behavior which resulted in what could be called, if you ask these two gentlemen, vandalism, no one thinks of it as a crime to put in the box of crimes. They say this person with this medical issue needs a different kind of help, and we call the doctors. If you are a mentally ill, if you are an individual with mental illness and you're standing in a public restroom and you kick the door in and break the glass and someone calls the police, what happens to you? It's an illness. You go to jail. If you are a mentally ill person in Metropolitan State Hospital, I have a case like this, Metropolitan State Hospital, and you kick the door or refuse to move, sometimes you can end up with a charge of a crime. So given that little perspective, shift the paradigm, and I'll say it and then I'll let Gilbert, we'll move down, because otherwise, as I said, I could talk all night, so you may have to stop me. Just real quick. No, and I know there's lots of questions, but I do want to say that. Yes. So to me, the paradigm is like this. If I set it up for us tonight so we had something concrete to think about, let's think about it like a formula. We have a behavior and a consequence, and then a crime. Now we're going to just keep ourselves in the criminal justice box, and I do say justice. I haven't switched to make it so legally. It's supposed to be justice. We're working there. I have a behavior and a consequence, and someone looks at it and calls it a crime, and there are boxes and boxes of different crimes over here. So this behavior plus this consequence equals that box. That's the current paradigm. That is to say, it doesn't matter if the person who committed the behavior or that behavior was the result of mental illness. If you take it, and the formula is you look at the consequence, and if the consequences are the door was broken or the mirror was broken, you put it in the vandalism box. So to me, when all of us talk about shifting the paradigm, you have to say, what are we going to do? And I give a simple little something here. And that is move that formula away. From now on, we are in the criminal justice system, and on the outskirts, the police who arrest folks, and the DAs who, prosecutors, not just the DAs who charge things. They're going to look at that behavior. They're going to look at the actor, and they're going to say, what was going on with this person when they committed this behavior, which admittedly affected, was a danger, let's say. Let's say this behavior was a danger to the public or a danger to self. What do? We could charge a crime, or we could say this person who committed this behavior that was a danger to self or others did so because of a mental illness. That was the root cause. That's what was happening at the time. And we're not going to go down that other path and put them in one of those crime boxes. We are going to say, we are going to treat them. This behavior plus mental illness equals treatment. Not crime, but treatment. So that's just the premise of where I come from and what I'm looking at. And there's many other things and many other layers that perhaps questions will raise, because that's kind of simplistic. And then I promise I'll say one last thing. I challenge you to this. Look, you can say to us, I can say, anybody who, you're running for DA, maybe you would say this, or whoever else is in here. We could simply lock the jail doors. Let's say, from now on, this day forward, we're locking the jail doors. There will be no, for those who have a mental illness. There will be no entrance into a jail for those who have mental illness. We're going to say that. And then I turn to you. I even say this as a defense counsel now. And I say, okay, now what? Because now we have someone who is mentally ill, who may be a danger to self or others. Where do we go? What do? We need treatment centers, right? We need you in your communities to take care of that, to elect city councils that will get police chiefs to train their people. So my point is this: just locking the jail door to those who have mental illness will not solve our problem, because the reality is some mentally ill folks, and the behavior that they exhibit at certain times is a danger to self or others, and we need to help them. Okay, that's it. And I took 3 to 5 minutes.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much. There has to be someone from Southwestern in the room, so that would be me. Good evening. Thank you for allowing me to come here. But I do have some connections to Loyola. My best friend, Bobby Grace, is here. He's Loyola grad, and Grace is somewhere around here. I don't know where she went, but there she is. So I am connected to Loyola that way. I agree with a lot of what Vera said. The problem is we don't have those treatment facilities, so I'm going to start from the backwards up. The question is, what do we do now? So I've been charged by my boss to lead the Mental Health Division, which was created in January 2019. Our mission is to try to do what we can, when we can, to get as many people out of the criminal justice system and into a community-based system of care. But the operative phrase is when we can. And that's when you have to look at the acts that were committed. I will tell you that in the area of mental health, in particular when we're talking about the criminal justice system, the adversarial system has to tamp down. And that's what we're doing. We're trying to do this in the DA's office. I know they're trying to do that in the PD's office. As Vera told you, we meet often. It's probably like once a week, maybe once every other week, but it's down to once a week now. With APD lawyers as well, and sometimes with DMH officials, trying to come up with a way where we can be as collaborative as we possibly can in these areas. We're going towards the point where hopefully something that's never happened anywhere that I can think of, where PDs and DAs will be sitting inside the same room, listening to presentations about mental health issues. How does it affect folks in the criminal justice system? How does it affect folks who have been charged with a crime? And trying to tamp down the adversarial process so we can try to work at trying to get as many people out of the criminal justice system and into community-based systems of care. When I first started this, I figured I'm going to be seeing a whole lot of what I consider to be low-level felonies. As Vera mentioned, the vandalism cases, I thought that I would be seeing a lot of those. I don't see those. I see cases where people have stabbed other people. I see cases where people have beaten someone up to a pulp. I've seen cases where it's a family member where the parent is beaten up by their child who's an adult, and the parent doesn't want to cooperate with us. The parent doesn't want to press charges, but the parent will say, but he can't stay here. He's too violent, or she's too violent. And so that's one thing I am charged with thinking about. If the person is too violent for them and we're going to place them in a community-based system of care where they can walk away, which has happened, is that the right place for them to be? Because they could harm themselves or they could harm other people. Or do we put them back in jail where they could harm themselves, commit suicide, or harm other people? But those are the cases that I've seen, and I think I've told Vera this, at times I think I see cases where I think I make life and death decisions maybe 3-4 times during the week. And I should preface this by saying, is everyone familiar with the mental health diversion statute that was passed? All the mental health diversion cases now come through me throughout the county. And I look at to determine whether or not we're going to object or whether or not we're going to submit. The reason why they all come through me is because we're trying to be as consistent as we possibly can. We don't want anyone to get any kind of different justice out in Lancaster as they would get in Compton or Long Beach or whatever. So they all come through me. And so the cases that I see are really not, I do see some vandalism cases, and they're fairly easy for me to decide. But the cases I see is where someone has been injured badly. And so I try to figure out, are we going to submit on this, or are we going to object? If I submit, that means the person goes into a community-based system of care. They could walk away. They could harm someone out in the public. If I object, that means this person goes back to jail, and they would decompensate more. They'll get some mental health treatment, but it's not optimum. They'll decompensate more, and they could possibly harm themselves, commit suicide. So that's where we are. But through, I think through what we're doing with the PD's office and the DA's office and the judges, the DMH, we're trying to find a way where we can be as collaborative as we possibly can in this area. Because again, when we're talking in the realm of mental health, the prosecutor who wants to win in court, the defense who is just trying to get their person out in any way they can, that has to tamp down, because we've got to look at the individual who is living with a mental illness. So I'm happy to be here and happy to engage you along these lines.
Thank you. Nancy?
Thank you. And I'm the only non-legally trained person up here. What I do bring to this discussion is my lived experience and the families that I have helped and supported my efforts through NAMI. For those of you who are not familiar, how many here is familiar with the National Alliance on Mental Illness? Awesome. You hear me? So just quickly, how I basically got started in advocating for mental illnesses. I had a sister who had suffered from schizophrenia. Luckily because we had a really strong family support system, we were capable of supporting her for most of her life with schizophrenia, and did not have to traverse through a lot of the challenges that many families that I'm working with. So we were pretty lucky on that one. Unfortunately, as some of you who may be familiar with mental illness, relapses happen, and schizophrenia that happens. My sister was in a mental health crisis in 2012, and she was visiting a mental health center where she had been receiving services, and the folks at the center was trying to get her to the hospital, voluntarily, because she was in active psychosis. And nowadays, in mental health crisis case, you call law enforcement for what they call a 5150, involuntary commitment. So the center called the local sheriff's department, and they responded. 4 deputies responded, and basically, she had a small hammer in her hand at that time at the center in the lobby, and they asked her, or they directed her to put it down. They say she didn't comply. They tased her and they kill her. So this was from the time the call was made. This happened within a matter of 8 minutes. From the call that was made, it was not a 911 call, it was a call to the dispatch station, to the local sheriff station dispatch. And to the time she was shot and killed was 8 minutes. And my sister was smaller than me, and 4 deputies responded. So that's my really wake-up reality to what a mess our mental health care system was. I didn't even have an opportunity to even help her walk through the system and get a care. And that's how I got connected with NAMI to basically learn. So I educated myself about mental illness after the fact. And this happened in 2012. And since then, I have been active in helping families, learning about mental illness, raising awareness, advocating for better response by law enforcement in responding to assist in mental health crisis calls, in which I advocated for the Civilian Oversight Commission, and also went before them in advocating for the increase in med team. So I'm really hopeful that there has been a tremendous increase in the med team in the county, and thank you to Sean and the Civilian Oversight for doing that, because during that time, there were 4 med teams in LA County, and right now I believe there's about 26 or something around that. But there are still lessons to be learned. So that's my encounter. So I myself have not walked directly through the criminal justice system, but I can tell you, had my sister survived that shooting, she would be in jail facing felony, because the deputies that responded at that file that they were responding to the attempted murder of a peace officer. So for those of you that are up here, you know what kind of charge we're looking at. And she was ill. So that's that. So I bring tonight here basically my observations of families that I have helped, have loved ones that pretty much have been through the criminal justice system, and I'll put some notes just to give you a feel. So mine is not from a practitioner's standpoint, but from the family. On all 3 conversations here, discussions have been talking about DAs, PDs, judges, the family members missing in that conversation, family members who have lived it. And that is really one of the frustrations that the families that I help have encountered. Once the loved one gets thrown into the criminal justice system, families are literally blocked from having any type of communication in terms of what is happening with your loved one. Now, bear in mind, often when an individual gets thrown into mental health into the criminal justice system, it's because they are in active psychosis, and they were determined probably by somebody in the system that that individual did not meet criteria for care, or if they're already in the system getting care, they're not receiving the appropriate level of care, and they commit an offense, and the offense gets referred to the DA's office. So, and as Wendy pointing out here, rather than getting the individual who's in active psychosis to a hospital or higher level of care, is referred to the DA's office right now as a crime. So they get prosecuted. You don't prosecute people for a heart attack. you're going to prosecute people for a stroke. You get them to the hospital first to treat the illness. That is not happening with folks in active psychosis. And families, from the families I have learned, the legal process, the jail environment, it's not conducive to the individual getting care. They are pretty much, in fact, it prolongs the illness and it exacerbates the symptoms. So that makes their recovery a lot more challenging. And so families already are trying to they already are trying to get care for the loved one, but now they're being thrown into learning how to maneuver the legal justice system. Families are not equipped to do that. And one of the challenges that most of the families I have worked with is basically, their focus is how do I get care for my loved one? But because they're within in the criminal justice system, their perspective is how do we adjudicate this offense? So there's no meeting of the mind between the family member whose sole goal and focus is still trying to get this sick loved one care. So please, if anything you're discussing going forward, one of the frustrations that families have come across, they are shut out of the system. In fact, I had a mom who was told to stop talking because she was calling the PD, she was calling the district attorney's office just to find out how to get the loved one in the system. And the mom was told that she is making it harder for her loved one. I had another mom who had to hire a private attorney in order to communicate with the DA and the PD because they would not talk to the family member. And the family member is the one who has the history of this, the nuances of each individual's illness that can support the treatment plan. So the paradigm, I'm really happy to hear about the paradigm. In fact, I was in an event with DA Lacy last year where she had told me about the creation of this mental health diversion, which was something NAMI, I was with the Criminal Justice Council that advocated for probably in 2013, a few years back. Somebody from the DA's office would show up and would say, why is it, my question is, why is it if somebody has a mental illness, commits an offense, it gets processed like a regular referral to the DA's office? Why is the mental illness not looked at? Because if it weren't for that mental illness, that offense might not have happened. Had that individual been treated correctly by our current system of care, that offense would not have occurred. So I'm really hopeful to see how the implementation of the division is going to work and how it's going to help.
Can I just add something to what you were saying? Because Vera knows we were in the meeting with the DA and several and other people from DMH. At our joint curriculum, we have someone from NAMI that's going to come and also present to us.
Right.
I don't know if you know Mark Gale.
Yes.
Yes. So
Mark Gale's a good person.
we understand.
So he knows, and he and I share. We actually talked about this before I came here to share some of the insight we're looking at. But so one of the things that's really, in terms of diversion, there is a diversion program in the DA Flores, but families are clueless as to what diversion is or what the criteria is, because most families are told they don't meet criteria for diversion. So so if they don't meet criteria, how do we divert somebody who needs care and they commit an offense because of a mental illness? So diversion has to work for everybody, not just a few. So quality of life issues, quality of life crimes, then they get the diversion. As you indicated, a lot of the cases you saw, family members get assaulted because I had a family. The mom was literally stabbed by a sister, but the person was in a care facility, was off medication. The facility did not inform the mom. And the facility washed their hand. They have no responsibility. We got to change that. Our system of care, our current system of care has to be also held accountable when that care is not delivered. That is something that needs to be looked at. Because had the care been delivered appropriately, maybe the act could have been avoided. So that conversation needs to happen. And yeah.
So, Vera, can I follow up on that? I mean, we're both longtime public defenders, and what Nancy says, I have to say, rings true. What kind of training is going on at the public defender's office about dealing with people with mental illness? I hear this all the time, that the trial PD can't talk to the family or won't talk to the family. It sounds like a formula for disaster.
Yeah, and, you know, not to be defensive of the defense bar here on our side, but I am a little bit. You know, the problem with bringing individuals in the criminal justice system is you do get lawyers involved. When you have a lawyer involved with an individual, there are certain ethical responsibilities and representation. I'm just going to say that before I tell you what we do. And that is, if I have a client and my client says to me, do not tell my family anything, my duty is to my client and not the family. Now, that's the basic tenet of defense work, whether the person is mentally ill or not. But I will say this. In our office, we do have a mental health court. Maybe you all know that. It used to be called Department 95. I always call it a mental health court. And we have, what our office has done is dedicated, and the County Board of Supervisors, by the way, has moved up and dedicated more lawyers. That's one thing we've done, is resourced it, so that we can better facilitate and work with and try to find community programs for those individuals who enter the system. You know, I can say that we have, over the last, 7, 8 years, since I've been involved, I'll take credit for that, that we do office-wide training and seminars, and people notice. It's kind of like, you remember, I don't know if you remember this. Remember when people used to smoke in your car? You just have the smoke around. You went to a restaurant and they smoked and nobody said anything. And then suddenly somebody became aware and said, you know, you can't smoke anymore around people. It's not healthy. And then people began to say, hey, I see this now. I see the danger of this. So also it is with an illness. Many lawyers for generations, decades, didn't look at whether someone was mentally ill or not. They didn't look at whether someone had a disability, whether they were intellectually disabled. It took some spotlight in this nation for all of us to see that. For those of us, many people who maybe don't live with someone who has mental illness, but most certainly as professionals. I recognize that as a teacher, and I recognize that as a lawyer. So in our office, we do have training. I do think that when family members have a problem with contact, we have a hierarchical system. We have supervisors. You can call the supervisor. I know that personally I can say that when I get a call from a family member about an individual, their loved one that's in the jail or has a case, that we're very responsive. That's all I can say. I can't tell you that I can tell you this to give you some idea of the magnitude. You know, all of you probably, that on any given time in the jail population in the county jail, there are between 17,000 and 19,000 individuals. Of those, 3,000 to 5,000 have been designated as individuals with mental health issues. Of that 3,000 to 5,000 individuals, in 2017, we had, for that year, 7,000 individuals who were charged with a criminal complaint, who our lawyers said needs mental health help. They're not competent. They can't proceed. And those 7,000 individuals went to the mental health court. Now, I say the year 2017, and to go back to what I said about awareness and the change and the breakdown in our communities for health care, in 2010, I think it was, the number of individuals who were referred to the mental health court with the same incompetent stand trial issues, 800. 800. So between 2010 and 2017, that's the arc and the change and the recognition. And it's not just we see it more, it's because it is more prevalent. Why? Because we don't have places in the community to care for our family members. And I want to take, since you got me the mic in defense, can I take one more moment?
You can.
Okay.
You can.
No, I'm going to take it. Thank you. Look, when we all sat down and said, this is terrible, this is a travesty, and I will say, I know this is I don't want to be political here, so I'm not promoting any one candidate, but when Jackie Lacey stood up in 2015, might have been 14, and said, you know what, we have a problem, and there's a blueprint for change. It was at a time when no one else was doing that. And I have to say, at that particular time, the public defender wasn't standing next to her. But when I said change takes time, if you had 2 hours to sit with me, I'd show you. I'd show you that the very end result is this. It's the roadmap that you folks at ATI, where we finally got the Board of Supervisors and others to get on board to fund this thing. But we started out with her having working groups. I want to give you one example of why it takes time for change. And one of those working groups was called Community-Based Restoration. We sat down in a group with all the justice partners and community members. I'm not sure if NAMI was there or not. And we began to build this program. What do? And we sat together week after week, and we convinced DMH, give us 10 beds. And then we got 20. And who were these beds for? They were for people who were arrested, charged with a crime, when they were acutely mentally ill, to move them into the community because they were so acutely ill they couldn't cooperate with in their case. And you know why that's great? Because once they go out, they don't come back. Well, at least 77% don't. That's the success rate. And we built that one bit at a time. In fact, you're going to hear from a speaker, Elizabeth Kim, in the back, who is with the Office of Diversion and Reentry. Once we got that going, Department of Health Services and the board created the Office of Diversion and Reentry, and they set this program up. And now we have, Elizabeth can tell you better, over 1,000 or more misdemeanor clients who are out in the community with treatment. And now they've done it for our felony clients. And we have other options available now. We're doing that. So, but it doesn't happen overnight, folks. It isn't just saying it. It is, and I have to say that the DA's office isn't where we want them to be, but at least like Gilbert is sitting down and we're doing this. It just takes so much and so many resources. And so also in our office with public defenders, we can do better.
Okay. Thank you for that. I would say, Vera, that I think when a client tells me, don't talk to my family, that's a huge red flag to me. Gilbert, can I ask you this? Because I just really respect what you're saying about collaborative mental health courts. You know, and I think a lot of PDs are resistant to collaborative courts, but I've seen some good things. But there are crimes of violence, and then there are crimes of violence. I have clients spitting on LASD deputies who are charged with felony assault. So my question is, are defendants with mental illness who are charged with so-called crimes of violence eligible for the specialized collaborative mental health courts that prioritize treatment over incarceration?
All right, well, if you're talking about, yes, they are. If you're talking about those type of crimes, spitting, and if you're calling that violent, that's one of the first things that Vera brought to my attention and I saw in our office. We went to the sheriff's deputies, and then there's command staff. And sometimes it's just not spitting, it's urine, it's feces that they're also throwing. But we said, look, if they are living with a mental illness, why present those to us? And then the other answer is, why are we filing it?
Yeah.
So
Thank you.
And so I've gone to our filing deputies also, and I said, we've got to change the way we look at these cases. And I think what we've got the sheriff's department to do, that if someone is in their Twin Towers with the yellow jumpsuit on, that they were going to really think about, I can't say any better, not sending those cases over. But if they're in general population, they will. And then it's up to us to determine whether or not those cases should get filed. We're looking at that. We are trying to make changes in the filing considerations for that. But I should also tell you that when you're talking about other crimes of violence and the crimes I was talking about earlier, the question is, we look at everything. That's what I've been charged to do by my boss. We look at everything. I cannot say that I'm going to agree every single time that someone should get a community-based system of care based on what I've told you before. But we look at everything. People might call robberies very violent, and they can be. But if you're talking about it in the context of a robbery that's committed inside of a CVS where someone's picked something up and the security guard is going over to that individual and saying, even give that back, and there's a tug of war, that is something that we can definitely see that individual, if they're living with a mental illness, should get mental health diversion or get ODR or something along those lines.
I really appreciate that, because sometimes I hear that crime of violence, it precludes. And so what you're saying is, no, give it a shot.
No, yeah, we look at everything.
We have some people on diversion who have one would call
Yes.
committed a criminal violent act.
We have people on diversion who've stabbed other people. So we do have that.
Okay. Joseph, can I just put you on the spot? Where does the current DA approach to dealing with defendants living with mental illness, where does it come up short, and how would you change it?
So I think that it's important that we're talking about it, that there is this blueprint, that Ms. Lacey has at least been vocal about this issue. But I think where we fall short is that when we have the rhetoric that appears as if we're making the progress on a wider scale, but we're not, it's harmful. And so being here today, what I'd like to discuss is, we have this mental health unit, but as Mr. Wright just told you, it's just him. One head deputy for a population of 10.1 million. I want you to think about that and the filter that it takes to write a memo to this unit and then ultimately make its way back down to a deputy like myself in a courtroom. And what we found is that the wait time is so long that courts are acting without our office's input, and we sort of default to the opposed mental health diversion position. So that's harmful. And I'm not saying that we haven't made progress or that it won't be quick, right? It's going to take time. But we have to provide deputies with the training that's needed to address mental health cases. I can tell you that I don't know exactly all of the resources available. I have to seek it out and try to figure out what to do, but a lot of this is defense-driven. So we also fall short when we're reactive to situations. So PC 1001.36, that's the legislature enacted the mental health diversion statute. That was done by the state legislature. It took until January of this year for us to create a unit. So we were reacting to legislation. We were not being proactive. And that's where the DA's office falls short. If we're reactive to crime, if we're just sort of addressing things that happen afterwards, we're too late. So I think, as I mentioned earlier, where we can do better is that we can partner with mental health professionals at the stage of filing. Does something need to enter our system in the first place? Because I've had one too many cases, as Mr. Wright said, where a family member is hurt during a struggle, and clearly there's psychosis because the individual doesn't want to take their meds, or their individuals being told by other voices to jump out of the window. Schizophrenic individuals. But we file that case, and what happens to that person? They're automatically put into the county jail system. Bail is set at $1 million on an attempted murder, and they will wait there and deteriorate. The other situation, when we talk about people who are not competent, they go to our mental health court just to regain competency. So we medicate them to the point where they could assist in their defense, but as soon as they are found competent, they're back in a courtroom pleading guilty, receiving credit for time served, and released back into the community without any sort of treatment or any sort of plan to address the root causes. And I've seen one too many defendants who I get to know by name because that happens over and over and over again. So where we can do better, I think, is build bigger partnerships with the DA's office and DMH. We should have a professional available at every branch office. We have 47 courthouses in this county. We should have someone in each courthouse because it's too late when we're trying to email downtown and wait for a response. When there are 1,000 deputy district attorneys and we've charged one with this such important task of filtering out who gets diverted and who doesn't. It's just not an equitable situation, and I don't think that it's fair to the defendants, to their families, and to the community at large, because our ultimate goal as DAs is community safety, and that means looking after the defendants as well.
But Joe, can I just say, first of all, the mental health division.
Can you talk in the mic?
The mental health division includes our psychiatric section, and our ODR. So there's about, and our yeah, that's our section, psychiatric section. It has about 9 deputies. So there's about 13, 14 deputies in our division.
I'm talking to Mike Gilbert. We really want to hear what you have to say.
Sorry about that. So there are about 14 people in our division. But you're right. I am charged with looking at all of those motions that come through, and again, it's for consistency's sake. It doesn't mean that that's the way it's always going to be, but we just started in January, and I'm charged with getting it. Now, I must tell you also, I'm pretty quick about getting my decisions out. So it would be, and when I say quick, I mean it takes me about an hour to go through with all the stuff I'm looking at. I look at prior criminal history. I look at the instant case. I look at there's other crimes. I look at that. I look at the defense motion. I look at the psych evaluation, and a lot of this stuff I'm doing at home as well. But the decisions are getting out there, I think, in a fairly quick manner. But if you find it's not, I would hope you would contact me and let me know.
Sean, can I correct just something you mentioned, or at least, if not correct, clarify? The public defender participates in collaborative courts. We are the mover and the shaker for downtown, for example, at the CJC, the biggest court in the county. There is a collaborative court within which there are 3 different kinds of programs. And we are actively, there's a maternal health, there's, I forget that there's a SENS, a drug, and there's something else, and I'm sorry because I'm not in that court. But it's dealing with the population in a different manner than we do in our regular criminal court system. And there are other collaborative courts. And we embrace that, and we drive that, and we would, we push the agenda and the efficacy of those courts. So you mentioned that we're not particularly hot on collaborative courts. Absolutely.
No. What I meant is old-style public defenders resist in the beginning, but many have.
Well, there aren't any old style anymore.
Well,
we
that's
got rid
good
of
to
them.
hear. That's good to
gone.
hear. For the fans of KPCC in the audience, we have Frank Stoltz, who would like to ask a question.
This is a broader question for the prosecutors. There's a statistic that's been bothering me for weeks that the New York Times actually printed about the incarceration rate in Los Angeles County. According to the Center for Juvenile and Criminal Justice, in 2017, we sent over 600 people per 100,000 to state prison. San Francisco sent less than 200. I think it was like 124, 174. Anyway, it was by magnitudes less. How do you explain that?
I think that the way you explain it is people are getting arrested, and we're charging some of those crimes. I haven't.
Is Los Angeles that much more criminally minded? Do we have that many more?
No, but
criminals?
I think the population is different.
Well, of course, but that much.
But I haven't studied what's going on in San Francisco. I think what's going on in the mental health arena. I don't know how to explain that other than I can tell you on any given day there are about 17,000, as Vera mentioned, in the county jail, and it's going up even with the programs that we have, the ODR, the mental health diversion, the collaborative courts. I don't know. I can hazard a guess, but it wouldn't be based on scientific. But you would have to think about the homeless issues as well that we're facing, maybe contributing to that too. But the bottom line is, in particular, if someone's living with a mental illness, and it's particular if the act they've committed is something that we should find another place for them to go to, then we should do it. The problem is we don't have those places, and we've got the only place is prison, county jail, or you have locked facilities, or you have community-based system of care. But what I've said is, because you only have those three, if we had more facilities, we could probably send a lot more folks to a community-based system of care where the public would be safe, they would be safe, people that are treating them would be safe, but we just don't have that. We just don't have that.
Frank, I just want to add, it's going to be hard for any of us to figure that out because the office doesn't keep data, right? We've been resistant to keeping data on who we bring into the system, who's arrested, and what the disposition is. So without that transparency, it's very hard to keep us accountable. And you've heard this idea of sort of the black box of the DA's office. LA County is the definition of that, unfortunately. But as Gilbert said, we have a large homeless population. In LA County, there's about 53,000 homeless people. And about a quarter of those individuals are suffering from some sort of serious mental illness. And that is a large part of who we bring into our system. So I think, getting back to why we're all here, the important part is how we address, first off, handling those types of cases. And the options of just state prison or county jail are sort of they're antiquated, and we can do better, I think, as a system, working together with the PD's office, private defense attorneys, and the families, as Nancy mentioned earlier.
Yeah, but and correct me if I'm wrong, but we do keep data. If someone were to ask us how many people we prosecute a year, we could provide that. But I don't know if you're asking for something more specific than that. We can break it down by crimes. We can break it down. We just can't give case numbers because that's prohibited by the government code. But we do keep data in that regard.
I have a question for all three individuals. In 2016, California passed Statute 8B 1194, the historical course of illness. How often is that statute used when somebody is referred with a mental illness, a case of referred? How is that looked at? I know, like recently, I had a case where a family member had called a sheriff's department for services, and the family member tried providing that information to let the responding deputies know that this person has a history of mental illness. The deputies declined to accept that information. That was a statute that was passed in 2016. How often is that used, that tool?
I think that's used mostly by the police agencies, but I haven't heard that it being used within the district attorney's office. So it's more so on the front end with law enforcement, the first responders.
But when you are processing a case and looking at a case, whether you're going to charge or not, or whether to divert, isn't that an important factor, the historical course of the person's illness?
In that regard, again, we've working with the law enforcement agencies. We are tasking them with, when they bring in cases to us, that they have to let us know if there is a mental illness issue that's there. When we see that, we put that on our file, even if we file the case, to alert the deputy that's going to be handling the case down the line. But also you need to remember, if a person is coming into jail, the law says by the second day we've got to file a case. So things have got to move real fast.
You would have to file a case if there is a case.
That's correct. That is correct. Thank you. But as folks in the ATI know, we're trying to work on ways where we can get mental health clinicians at that intercept to try and weigh in on this person's mental illness. It's going to be a difficult process, but we're trying to talk through it.
Can we take a couple more questions from our audience? Alyssa, you're up next.
Hi, I work with Frank. I cover mental health. I'm one of the health reporters at KPCC. I did a story this summer where I followed a woman for 10 months that was on and off the street in and out of jail and very sick. And now I just got word she's back in jail. Why have the county not adopted San Francisco Wiener's bill SB 40, or SB 40 and then, or SB 1045 that could potentially look at conservatorship? The parents have tried conservatorship. I think you mentioned that you try to get a hold of the parents. I actually followed the parent for 10 months, never got a hold of anybody from a DMH liaison, didn't know where her daughter was at times. So I'm just wondering it's a drain on the taxpayers' dollar to have this person in and out of the jail, plus into hospitals. So at what point do we stop this cycle, and why have we not? What's going on with our conservatorship program?
If I could, Sean, just jump in. In fact, part of the ATI is to look at conservatorships. I know that we have, for years, and I don't know that DMH is here to defend themselves, but there was a policy about pursuing conservatorships on someone who happened to be in the jail, even though it was clear they were gravely disabled and had because of a mental disorder, because they had food, shelter, and clothing. Guess where it was? In the jail. And so we pushed and have pushed so that there is a door opening that we will be able to. I know it's slow. You look at me and you like it's. If I could just say, hey, do it. But I agree. So therefore, what I say to you, what I'm saying is, look, some of this is on us, all of us. I'm not saying as a public defender, as a community member. You demand that our departments of health services, DMH, DHS, DPH, that they provide these services for a selected population. We have the assisted outpatient treatment program that our office, we drove that. We actually should be, and I shouldn't say this too loud in case disability rights is here.
But what do you do for people who are so sick that can't be an AOT?
Well, they could be, exactly.
But
then
they've
they
been
should
kicked
be
out
an
of
LPS.
AOT.
But the LPS law is a little more complicated than that. One, it's complicated because you can't get an LPS.
But Wiener has a bill that San Francisco adopted, so we're also, I'm like piggybacking onto San Francisco. Yeah. They also have a high, why aren't we looking at, that's, so more people can get on conservatorship.
We had last year, I think it was last year too, 5,940 individuals on conservatorships. And that was within the mental health unit, and those were civil commitments. And we have built up, but not significantly, assisted outpatient treatment. And it is problematic. Part of it is the law. It's the law needs to be changed in some respects.
But we have a new law that is, it's not perfect, but it has been passed and it is implemented.
It's not sufficient.
It's not sufficient. But how do we know if we haven't done the pilot program? So that's what I'm wondering, why we haven't done the pilot program. The San Francisco...
Which pilot program?
SB 1045, SB 40 that changed. It's Wiener's bills. It's for LA County, San Francisco, San Diego County.
I'm sorry. I guess whatever the number is, I suppose it's the statute. But we have done. AOT was at one point.
So this bill would be if people have been this sick so many times and in and out in a year, they would be eligible. They would have to be conserved.
I think so. SB 40 that was just signed by Governor Newsom.
It
was 8 commitments within a 30-day period, right?
No, it was 8 commitments within
a year?
12 months.
And I think that's a good start, but I don't know that it's been written well enough to say what happens to these individuals, or do they get lost in our system?
But how do we know if we haven't tested it, I think is my biggest question. So I see this woman
on and off the street. That question probably should be directed to DMH or the Board of Supervisors and why things aren't funded and why they're not working. I can only tell you this, that we regularly, and by the way, that opens up another question. We regularly seek conservatorships and alternative commitments, but I have to say to you, this is a layered onion. I have a client. My client does not want to be committed. She does not want a conservatorship. She does, you read the article in the New York Times where the school teacher who went to Princeton, who decompensated and sat almost in the same spot all the time, year after year. People tried to help her. She said no, and she died there. And the article, as I digress to this just but quickly, this is complicated for all of us. The article talked about the ethical dilemmas in this. I mean, you could go to the Sachs Institute and hear a panel of people who say, don't involuntarily medicate me. I don't want it. So those are issues that we face as well. Do we involuntarily medicate people? We just had a client. I'm going to just give you one last example real quick. Okay, we had a woman who was offered diversion. She fell off, that is to say she AWOL'd, didn't get her meds, brought her back. We'll put you back on it. She said, no, I will not participate in that program. Sentence me. She got time served. But she did not want that program. So that's another layer that we deal with.
So we have had someone who's been waiting really patiently for a while. We have a member of the APD, James Sanford, who'd like to ask a question.
And APD is alternate public defender.
Sorry.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. I didn't even know who you were talking about. I was like, who's waiting? So I was going to start with introducing myself, but I guess I'll go into the questions. It's difficult for me to ask one question. I mean, doing this work here, and I was in San Diego County for 7 years and then came to Los Angeles about a year ago. So some of the things that I was particularly interested in, some of the things Mr. Wright had to say. What I will ask about is something that no one's touched upon yet, and that's substance abuse and mental illness. A DSM-5 diagnosis is substance abuse disorder. In my experience with mental health diversion or trying to receive or use this as mitigation, it's something that's been resistant on the other side. They don't see it or look at it as mental illness, even when you have a situation that someone has a drug-induced psychosis. I don't really care if they were previously diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, if they're acting and talking like they have command hallucinations and someone telling them what to do, whether it was related to drug usage in the past or mental illness, and usually it's a combination of the two. Is there anything that you're doing, or actually I'd love just your opinion on looking on those types of cases when you come across them. Do you give it less weight because it may be something due to drug abuse? Because that's the experience that I've received with your office.
And I would ask you if you have any more of those type of cases, contact me and let me know so I can take a look at it. But they should be coming through me. No, I look at what was done. I look at the acts, and if it's a DSM-5 if it's a DSM-5, I'm so sorry. If it's diagnosed and it's one of the DSM-5 recognized mental illnesses, then we consider it. We consider it, and we should all be considering it.
Okay. I have.
But no, seriously, I don't.
I mean,
know what
I
else to
agree
tell
with you, but it also kind of goes back to what Mr. Iniguez is talking about. Contact you directly. In a county with this many millions of people, he didn't talk about the weight. We actually worked in the same courthouse for some period of time in Alhambra. Mm-hmm. And the DAs were quoting to the judge 3 to 4 months for a response to our mental health diversion motion. Well, they said it over and over again. That's someone in your office. I can't tell you whether they're lying or not. I can only tell you what they said. And what we're experiencing because of that. And the judges are experiencing because of that.
Other DAs than myself is what you're saying.
Yes, I'm not talking about him specifically. I think we've only actually had maybe one case together. But I'm talking about the same exact courthouse and multiple DAs giving the same quotation because it's going to you directly, which also makes sense. The number of cases that I've had been eligible for mental health diversion, just me personally as an alternate public defender, and then thinking the ones that I've filed, which has still been less than that, and then duplicating that to the public defender's office and the other APDs and the private bar, and everything's going through you and you're taking an hour to do it. I couldn't imagine it getting to anyone for a couple of months.
First of all, September, October, we had 73 total. Total requests for mental health diversions.
I had 2.
So, we had 73. I get to them quickly. If someone is telling you it's taking 3 or 4 months, I would hope you and I can talk afterwards and I can talk to folks, and because that is not the case. It does not take 3 or 4 months for us. What I am hearing is that public defenders, alternate public defenders, are not getting the mental health reports in, and it's taking a while for that.
That takes a long time as well.
Right. But that is not me. That's taking 3 or 4 months. But we can talk.
Okay.
I would love to talk.
We have so many questions. Gilbert, can you tell us what kind of mental health training does a deputy DA of the mental health division receive in order to make fully informed decisions about who is eligible for diversion?
Well, there is no mental health clinician that we have. What we have, and I'm not a mental health expert, but what I have is 30 years of experience of going through cases, looking at a number of cases from the less serious to the most serious, reading the psych evals, and then making my opinions based on the tons of criteria that I look at. I don't want to tell you that I'm not a mental health expert, but I look at a number of stuff. I think I make an informed decision, and I'm looking at if we place this person in a community-based system of care, what is the public safety aspect of it? There are many times when I've said, I believe this person is living with a mental illness, but because of the acts that were committed, this person, in my opinion, is not suitable for a community-based system of care.
But no specialized.
Other types, but there is no. Yeah, and so when I bring in new deputies, I give them the criteria of what I go through, and I talk to them about that.
But we're lawyers, like we don't have mental health training. I was.
We don't have mental health training. I agree with you.
When I'm sorry to pile on this, just there's so much interest in. We're so happy to have you here. There's so many. I know the audience says when making diversion decisions, Gilbert, does the office account for disparities in access to mental health care? Like, some people, they can't get the care they need.
Of course, yeah.
Yes.
And that's not really what I'm looking at. I'm looking at how is this person going to function in a community-based system of care based on, again, I'm not a mental health expert, but based on the tons of criteria that I look at, including reading the psych eval. But there is no disparity if someone does not have the resources as another person does. There's no disparity in that.
Vera, do DAs and PDs and police share a common understanding of what constitutes behavior attributable to mental illness?
Well, I can't. Are you saying as a group, do I think we're all on the same page? No, we're not.
Yeah. Okay. Gilbert, what factors do you consider when deciding whether you are going to object or agree to diversion?
I look at I look at the facts of the crime. I look at the facts of the acts that were committed. I look at if there's any prior criminal history. I look at
what about mental health history?
Because there's mental health history. Yes, I do look at mental health history. If the person has been in treatments before, I try to get documents to figure out how well they functioned in those treatments before. I look at the victims, because I've got to look at what the victims are telling me as well. If the victims know the individual, did they notice any mental health history? I contact police officers because sometimes they don't put that this person was manifesting some mental health illness in their report, and you'd be surprised there's a number of times when they would tell me, yeah, this person was evidencing some mental health illness. Then I also look at the psych eval. I look at the defense motion.
But you are, the question is, no one asked for mental health history documents, but you're telling us you are interested in that, so defense counsel who's getting you that.
Well, I'm not to say they're not always getting me. Sometimes I can access it through just the documents that I'm getting. We may have a prior file where the person has committed a behavior.
But I just have to jump in. I'm going to cut him off real quickly because I want to go back to Office of Diversion Reentry because, look, DAs will never be clinicians. Public defenders have, in my view, a little more empathy or the root of it and get the stuff, but we're not either. So the real ticket here is we have a program with the Office of Diversion Reentry, and guess who does all the questions that you just asked, Sean? The clinicians, the program, and they tell us, yes, these people can do this, or yes, they will go to this treatment center, yes, we'll get them housing, and yes, they need that medication. And in my view, and this is where the DA needs to move the needle here, is when that happens, when some agency and provider like the Office of Diversion Reentry tells us that, then the DA should trust that and be more receptive to that individual than moving where we can get them. But we have that now. It's great and it works. It's just not big enough because we need more money.
I have a gentleman who's been patiently waiting to ask a question in the second row.
Believe it or not, it's not once a month. Every Friday we are on the corner of Sunset Echo Park. And the prisoner, we are 5% of the world population, but we have 25% of world population in prison. And each prisoner calling each other $5 per minute. What kind of system is that? What kind of system is that? There is a lot of things we could discuss. I really thank all of you for this event. I hope you have it every Friday, some other corner of the city. Please, we need this, kind of, event. I love to do that, but I love to ask you to come to Echo Park and Sunset every Friday, and the prisoner behind the wall with pots and a spoon, they start playing. We are 5% of world population, but we have 25% of world population in prison.
Thank you. And our hope is to have more forums like this. So,
and can I just say also, I know that I shared my document in a collaborative way. Vera knows exactly what I look at. I have it listed on the sheet. I collected to bring it here today. But they know exactly what I look at as well. So they also...
Can we distribute that to the attendees?
I will send it to you.
Okay.
Okay, I will send it to you. And by all means, it is not an exhaustive list, but it's a list that I think frames...
Right, and I think the list, right, the list came out in May or June.
Yes, correct.
May I add something?
Oh, go ahead.
Yes.
In terms of the collaborative effort, can you hear me? So in terms of the collaborative effort that's going on here, is there any way, as we're shifting this paradigm, to involve the family? Because I think if you involve the family in terms of long-term care, in terms of long-term support, we're going to reduce the amount of revolving door cycle here.
Well, I would say from a prosecutor standpoint, it's probably more difficult for the defense because the defense is probably not going to want, if your loved one is living with a mental illness and has been charged with a crime, the defense is probably not going to want you sharing any information with us for legitimate reasons. If the person that was injured is a victim, we're always there listening to the victim's family.
But the goal is treatment.
Yes. Yes.
The goal is treatment.
The goal is treatment, and where are we going to treat them? What everyone has been saying here, I think we all agree, is we need more facilities. There needed to be an infrastructure. And I know that if we waited for an infrastructure, probably nothing would happen. But there really needed to be an infrastructure when Penal Code Section 1001.36 was met, because we aren't meeting the demand.
Gilbert, the audience has asked what percentage of mental health cases actually have a victim as opposed to, property, drugs, disorder. They're wondering how many are actually,
I would say about 85 to 90%.
Okay.
It's very rare
so a lot.
That someone kicking in a door, that's the issue. And I would just say, I'm not saying that doesn't happen. I'm saying I'm not getting those cases. And probably for reasons that, the defense can probably plead them out and get them out quicker and maybe get them their mental health treatment that way. But I am not getting those cases. I get the cases that I told you about earlier, the more difficult cases to decide.
In the second row, the lady in the second row had a question. And then we're going to have to end. I'm so sorry.
Hello, I'm from Community Coalition. I'm from South Central LA. The question I want to ask the four panelists out there: how many mental hospitals do you think we have in South Central LA? Can anybody tell me how many?
I don't think, maybe one.
Only one, and that's Martin Luther King. What we need in South Central LA and everywhere is more mental hospitals for our families and our children. Because where will we put them? We don't want them in prison. We don't want them going to the police station. Next thing we find out, they end up dead. We want them in mental hospitals. We want more money to be funded in the mental hospital, places for them to go. And that goes for every county around Los Angeles.
Thank you. We need to take a bathroom and networking break, so we're going to break for about 5 minutes. I want to thank our panel. I knew this was going to be a hard-hitting discussion, but boy, it happened quicker than I thought. And It's really nice to see all of you move beyond platitudes and really dig into the matter. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, I hope everyone has had an opportunity to refresh and restore themselves. We're about to start our next panel, so if you can take a seat, that would be great. Do we have all our panelists up here? Okay, so if you're on the panel, can you just come up? If you're not, grab a seat. And so I just want to quickly introduce the moderator of our next panel, Alicia Varani, who is the Associate Director of the Criminal Justice Program at UCLA Law School, which means she's traveled essentially half the country to be here. We appreciate it when people from the west side make it over to, well, it's not even the east side, it's downtown. It's hard to get you over, and so we're grateful to have you here. So please take it away.
All right, we had such a spirited discussion. We have panelists still lingering from the first panel. No, let's keep these conversations going. Okay, so I'm so delighted to be here to moderate the second part of this conversation, which is really talking about what's the path forward. So we talked about in the last panel some of the issues and some of the developments that have happened in the law. So now we're really going to talk about what's the path forward. So if all of the panelists could really quickly just introduce yourself and your current role, and then spend about 2 to 3 minutes talking about your current work as it relates to the criminalization of mental health. So we'll just start here and work our way down.
Hi everybody, my name is Ellie Seth, Ellie for short. I'm a youth organizer with the Youth Justice Coalition, and I'm also the STOP Coalition coordinator. I'm not sure if you're all familiar. STOP stands for Stop Terrorism and Oppression by Police. We're a statewide coalition of families who had loved ones killed by law enforcement. I've been working with YJC for the past 2 years. We are doing a lot of work around, the criminal, justice system, or what I like to call the criminal injustice system. We are currently working on a community alternative to 911, CAT 911 for short, that implements, or is trying to implement transformative justice as a means to push away from the punitive, carceral system. We also we conducted research, and we created a map, which I forgot to bring, but we created a map to map the use of force incidences in LA County, and we found that from 2000 through 2017, there's been at least 854 people that were killed by law enforcement, and all but one have been declared within policy. They have been found to be, it's been justified. And I want to quickly share some stats. So LA County does lead the nation in use of force. 77 of the 854 that were killed by law enforcement were, 77% were either Black or Latino. And LAPD is responsible for at least 315 of those killings, and the Sheriff's Department is responsible for at least 305. So more than half of those folks that were killed were, through the DA reports, we found that they were exhibiting some type of mental health crises. And it's really heartbreaking to know that this is happening to our loved ones. I briefly shared a conversation with Nancy and how this is not just a number. 854 is not just a number. These are people. These are loved ones. These are human beings that could have been taking up the empty seats in here, but they're gone. So it's really important to bring in the families into these conversations. Actually, I had a cousin who was also killed by law enforcement in 2012. He was only 14 years old. He was killed in Santa Ana. And he was also exhibiting a mental health crisis. He wanted to run away. Law enforcement were called, and they ended up killing him. They shot him twice in the lower body, and then they shot him an additional, I believe it was 3 more times in the upper body. But he was crawling away from the officers, and they shot him while he was on the floor. So it's really heartbreaking to know that that this is happening to our loved ones. So it's really important to push away from depending on the carceral system, on the different systems that are in place. I just want to quickly show a show of hands. How many folks feel confident in if they were called to de-escalate a mental health crisis, how many feel equipped to de-escalate the situation or to address the situation without calling law enforcement? That's to de-escalate. De-escalating the situation. So that's one of the reasons why we're working on community alternatives to 911, where we want to equip everybody with the different tools to be able to respond to those situations without calling law enforcement, because we know when law enforcement is called, that escalates the situation, and we end up with our loved ones, killed or in prison. That's not what we want. So we're working on 5 main tracks, and that's peace building, police accountability, domestic violence, mental health crises, and first aid or wound care. So we want to equip folks with those skills to be able to, address these different situations. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Reba Stevens, and I am a person with lived experience. I was diagnosed with major depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, polysubstance, suicidal ideations, and PTSD. I was arrested 10 times. I've gone through 12 treatment facilities. I experienced 21 years of my life homeless, 21 years of alcohol and drug addiction. And as far back as I could remember as a young child, I always believed that there was something wrong with me. And when I met alcohol and other drugs, it started with me first becoming homeless at the age of 19. I felt I was very, very successful moving in my life. I was a student at Trey Tech, studying business administration, and I was caring for an elderly woman who I did not, because I was 19, I didn't prepare for her to die. And when she died, her family members that never visited, neither did I know existed, showed up and put me and my 2-year-old daughter out on the street, and that's where I became homeless. I became a caregiver for this woman because I had a child at the age of 17 with Shane, my mother, who was known in the community, and I just felt like, she was embarrassed, and I needed to be free. So today I am a homeless, substance abuse, mental health, community advocate for many folks, but I sit at many, many tables. I'm a member of LAHSA's, the Los Angeles Homeless Service Authority's Lived Advisory Board. I am also a member of the Ad Hoc on Black People Experiencing Homelessness, where we're looking at the overrepresentation of the criminal justice system, the child welfare system, homelessness. We also need to acknowledge the importance of looking at homelessness and the overrepresentation of Black folk. And when we talk about the criminal justice system, it's interesting because I just celebrated in July 21 years of sobriety, 21 years of being sheltered, which is 42 years. And when you go back 42 years, you realize that this is not anything that's new, that's happening in reference to criminalization. And it is truly important, but what's most important, you probably have to tell me to be quiet. What's most important is the fact that the people that were up here before who are actually in a position to learn something, I believe that each and every one of them walked out this door. And I would not feel good about myself, neither would I sleep well, and I might go get a drink after 21 years if I didn't sit here today and acknowledge the fact that they all left. When we are a group of people who sat and listened to them. And so together, it's going to take connectiveness in order for us to actually begin to experience true change.
Thank you.
Good evening. It's an honor to be on such a inspiring panel and also to come back home. I spent 10 years here at Loyola Law School at the Center for Juvenile Law and Policy, and working with youth initially in the Juvenile Justice Clinic, and then with Christopher Hawthorne, who's back there with our Juvenile Innocence and Fair Sentencing Clinic, where we represented juvenile lifers from LA County who are in our prison system. My most recent position, which I left, and I guess the best way to describe me is the former director of the Office of Reentry for the City of Los Angeles, but I feel like my experience is much more than that. I think that in my time at the city, I really tried to impart a much more holistic view on what the reentry population is and also what they need. I've been working as an advocate within the criminal justice system for 20 years. And I have worked with foster kids all the way through death row, and on death row cases. And I've spent a lot of years being a mitigation expert, which I'm sure some of you in here know what that is, but for those who don't know, the term really was started in death penalty cases where you would have somebody, usually a social worker like myself, sometimes reporters, who would do a full biopsychosocial and like a history of the client. And the point of it is originally was to save somebody from death. But what I think is the most important is that it's telling the real story of someone, because people are not whatever the worst thing they've done or whatever the crime that they committed or didn't commit. And so I just, when I'm sitting here and I listen to the prior panel and people talking about diagnoses, while I am a social worker and I believe in diagnoses, I think that it's much more than diagnoses, and trauma is something that needs to be really addressed and discussed. The trauma that people felt in the community, as well as the trauma that is inflicted on them within our juvenile justice and criminal justice systems. And so I think that if I was going to say, like, for all of my years getting to work with, from kids all the way to people going to prison and then coming back, I think that if I'm trying to look at a systemic solution, I think that there needs to be better communication between all of the systems, because I have had a client who I will not say, because I don't want to traumatize Hawthorne and Kennedy here, because it was a client that I would always harp on them that we need to be doing more for. But he is schizophrenic, and when he was a kid, he started hearing voices, and he would go into the halls, and he would be heavily, heavily medicated, and then he would be released with nothing. And then he would go to the camps and be heavily, heavily medicated, and then he would be released with nothing. And then he went to YA, which is now called DJJ, and he was released with nothing. And within weeks of his release from YA, he committed his life crime, and he was involved in a murder, and he ended up getting life without parole as a juvenile. Luckily, we have been able to resentence him, and he will continue going to the parole board until he can come home. But the point is that we have all of these systemic failures, and people aren't talking to each other, and our systems are just causing more trauma. And so that's what I'd like to share.
Thank you.
Hi. So my name is Elizabeth Kim. I'm the Director of Clinical Programs at the Office of Diversion and Reentry. We were created in response to a board motion recognizing that 5,500 clients are in jail right now with mental illness, and they're better treated in the community. So we operate, or have designed and operate, implement programs. We divert clients out of the county jail we have a pretrial diversion program, a true diversion 1001.36 program out of CCB. We've worked at community-based restoration for felony and misdemeanor incompetent to stand trial clients. We work with pregnant women, and I think that's it. Yeah, that's about it. So we work with our justice partners. We are clinicians by training. I'm actually also a lawyer by training. And we work with the DAs, the PDs. We work with Gilbert and Vera both, and the judges, and try to get people the services they need in the community, because they're not getting it in jail.
So my next question, and maybe I'll start that way and then come back, is either from something that you heard on the previous panel or just in your experience, what do you see as what's wrong with the way that mental health is conceptualized by the criminal legal system, or what's being misunderstood about mental illness by this system?
I'm going to be honest, to be fair, I sort of echo what Vera said before. I don't really want to say that there's something wrong with the way people see mental illness. I think that it's a lack of understanding, and there has been progress. It's been really slow and not as fast as we want, and it's not serving as many people as we want right now. But I do work with these DAs and these PDs, and I do think they're trying to understand it. I think when you're sort of a legal person by background, mental health is so complicated, and then to understand that and what treatment looks like and what's been lacking, I think, if anything, there needs to be more education and training, to be fair.
I think that from the last panel, I think the thing that's always most striking to me is, I'm forgetting his name, but the man who was in charge of the mental health unit, when we were talking about what does he get and what is he looking at to decide the diversion, and it's his booking and the crimes, and if there was a report. And for me, that is not what you should be looking at. There should be, what I was talking about, a full psychosocial history, right? Somebody doesn't end up in, I'm talking about clients that I represented, all of the clients who were in prison for the worst of the worst crimes, all murders, nobody that I represented did not have so much childhood trauma that is you wouldn't believe it. If I told you the stories, you would think I'm making it up. If it was a movie, you wouldn't believe it. But the point is that people make bad decisions and end up in the car of a drive-by shooting or whatever their case is, because of things that have happened to them and because of the choices they believe they have. Obviously, as an adult, they can see later that maybe they had other options. So I just really think that when we're looking at mental health, I think that diagnoses and all these things are really important. They're crucial in terms of medicating and all those things. But I think that really being able to look at people as individuals and the whole story of their childhood and talking, I know that we can't do this for every case, but I would go out with law students from Loyola, and we would go out and meet with teachers from elementary school and neighbors who lived in the neighborhood. And this was hard because it was cases from 25 years ago. But if you can't get the stories from family members and all those things, you're not getting the real person. And who we're trying to help are not cases. And they are clients, but they're more than clients. They're people, and they deserve that level.
Well, first I want to acknowledge that Nancy is here, who was a part of the very first panel. She has lived experience, a family member, and so it's really important to acknowledge that Nancy is still present from the first panel. So for me, it's stigma. It's really looking at the stigma around mental health and implicit bias. And oftentimes people don't really want to talk about implicit bias because we don't really understand implicit bias. When all we need to do is just look and ask ourselves, about our own personal prejudices and be honest in the fields in which we're working in. I was facing 4.5 years in prison on a 3-year joint suspension with an enhancement, and it was all around petty theft. Because see, for me, being homeless and undiagnosed mental illness, and trust me, I know I was crazy. I just got to keep it real with you. But in facing those 4.5 years in prison, you know, and the law's changing on you, and you're not knowing that these laws are changing, and no one's telling me or helping me to understand that this 3-year joint suspension is fixing to hang you from a tree. And then sentencing me later by God's grace to a behavior modification program where I arrived there and broke all rules, regulations, guidelines, and procedures. Told them where they could take passes and phases and shove them. Cutting up. Bad behavior. But I couldn't see myself. And I didn't understand what everything from growing up as a child, feeling emotionally disturbed because I was abandoned by my father at the age of 13, and I didn't understand how much that hurt. See, I came from a household where children were seen and not heard. And I was told, don't you tell nobody your business. Don't you tell nobody. So I learned how to really just stuff feelings and emotions and then when I had an opportunity, I couldn't differentiate the truth from the false. Because I lied. If you asked me how I was doing fine. I just didn't know how. So when I think about this panel and what was previously discussed, we're not looking enough at the stigma around mental health and what it is that we need in our communities. You know, first of all, there was someone who talked about what we have in mental health. We have 4 directly operated clinics. And then you have a host of subcontract agencies that are in the service area 6. But what we don't have are places where we can go where we don't have to feel self-stigma. Why is it that we just don't have community places that we can walk into that does not have anything to say about mental health, but more about our well-being? Places where not only I can go, but perhaps you'd like to come and play some cards too. You know, so that we can actually be a part of the community and feel good about ourselves. What's wrong with being able to say I'm sad? And I'm going to tell you something. When we talk about decriminalizing, we have to really face the fact that we have over 60,000 people who are currently homeless. We have over 40% of them are black folk. And then if you look at the judicial system and who's being criminalized for the most part, and I respect everybody, because you know we know that there's a rainbow locked up somewhere. But let's keep it real. We are overrepresented. But there's nothing in our community. And then you look at some of the Senate bills that they want to talk about that have been passed. Well, those Senate bills get passed. Why isn't the state who's passing those Senate bills fund those bills as they come out? Then you look for your local and county governments to fund them as they are needing more funding. Because you see, the truth is, if we don't be honest about what's really going on, and I appreciate each and every one of you who are sitting here today, who took the time for whatever reason that you hear. This is not a mistake. But the truth of the matter is that there's not enough of us who are actually lived experience, who should be a part of going through those court cases, helping to better understand why are there not focus groups that are happening from people that actually have been there, so that you better understand that we all came in on different boats. We just ended up on the same shore. And that one size does not fit all. And one person should not be the decision maker about what it is that we need, because nobody knows the backstory. I'm going to be quiet right now. But you said a whole lot. When they had to go back into the community and talk to the schools and the community to find out more about this person in their childhood. And the truth is, I was never abused growing up, physically. But emotionally, I was abused because my mother made a difference. My mother had 12 kids. And every year, I would get a navy blue sweatsuit for my birthday. And I had other sisters that would go to Macy's or somewhere and pick what they wanted. Do you hear what I'm telling you? For whatever reason that happened to me. But it scarred me. And I am truly grateful today that I'm not locked up in some mental institution because of it. But it sure enough was taking me there.
It's hard to beat. Personally, I feel like we're not divesting from law enforcement because we heard that this is about, funding. But if we look at the budget, who is getting the money? Where is that money being allocated to? It's to criminalize folks. It's not to fund community centers, to provide folks with the resources that we need as a community to heal and to grow. It's being directed to law enforcement. The previous panel kept talking about training law enforcement when they respond to a mental health crisis call. Why are law enforcement responding to a mental health crisis call? Why are they responding? Why are we not investing the money into better alternatives? Folks that are equipped with the necessary skills to properly address that situation. And I feel like we're stuck in this stagnant, punitive thinking where we place the blame on the person. It's a deficit thinking where we place the blame on the person. It's your fault. You did something. It's your fault you're here. It doesn't address the societal implications or conditions that put that person, that harm that person, all that emotional, all that trauma. It doesn't address any of that. So we that's why where transformative justice comes into place, because it looks at the person as a human being and not just as a number, not just as a statistic, and it allows the person to be heard. And it just shows that folks that stay today, this isn't just because it's a day job. Like the previous panel, some folks they left because it's just a day job. It doesn't affect them. It's just a day job, And it's so heartbreaking to know that, the folks that are the most invested is because we're personally affected by these issues, I don't know.
No, that was great. I actually want to pick up on a thread of something that you're saying around the punitive nature of all of this. And I wonder if anyone, and I'll just open it up to all of you, would like to comment on sort of how not just police and courts and all of that can be punitive, but if you feel like any of the service provision has sort of a punitive element to it, and what you've seen in that regard. I saw Reba nodding, so I don't know. I don't mean to call on you, but...
So here's the deal. So you look at mental health services today, right? And the question is, how often are people being seen? What is the current ratio in our clinics? So if I need to be seen, I cannot. And then oftentimes you find that people will go to be seen because they have a scheduled appointment. Let me tell you a story. Let me tell you my own story. I will never forget the day. It was November the 2nd of 1999. Prior to that day, I was clinically referred to the Augusta Hawkins Mental Health Center. I was 15 months without drinking and using, and the only thing that happened was I went on a medical appointment, and the doctor walked in and said, "How you doing, Ms. Stevens?" But it wasn't that she asked that, it was the way she asked it, as if she sincerely meant it. And she was so sincere that I broke down and cried. I arrived to that appointment, and I was told that appointment had been canceled and was going to be rescheduled in 30 days. Now, it took a whole lot of courage for me to walk through that door. Nobody understood, not even I at that particular time. Because my thoughts were, what are people going to think about me? Nothing about what I thought about myself. It took courage. And I cut up, and I demanded that somebody was going to see me, because nobody understood the courage that it took for me to walk through that door. So it's important that we're asking the Department of Mental Health about the ratio And how are we going to provide more services into the community to make certain that we're meeting an individual's needs? And what do those services entail? Because oftentimes you'll find that, for me, I needed psychological therapy. That's what I needed. Behavioral cognitive therapy is what I needed. And that's what I got. I was seen every single week. But it was only because of the person who was seeing me who believed in what they were doing. So the other question is, who's providing the services? Who's serving who? Who cares?
I think we all like when you get started. Thank you.
I think you mentioned earlier about like the implicit biases, and all of us have them, but we need to be actively working to unlearn those things, and it's a product of colonialism. So we all are affected by this, but we need to be actively working to unlearn that and learn a way of thinking where it's not a deficit, where we're not like causing more harm or blaming the person. I feel like not enough people are learning about that. We're not taught to communicate effectively. We don't have any of these models. So we think that, the carceral system is normal. We think that criminalization is normal because we haven't lived in a society that hasn't had that, We have to look at, other communities, like the Zapatistas. There's like indigenous folks that have these different systems in place that aren't so punitive, because it's just, to me, it's sad because it's true. I graduated from Cal State LA, and in order to meet with a counselor or a therapist, to seek any type of like medical or mental health attention, it takes 6 weeks for you to get an appointment, for you to meet with somebody. And what if the person is needing like immediate help? It's gonna take 6 weeks for them to see somebody, and that it takes a lot for a person to even seek out an appointment, to reach out. And now we're forcing folks to wait a crazy amount of time to get that attention that is not adequate.
Just really quickly, I mean, I think that the stigmatization begins before we even touch the criminal justice system. Within our school systems, at Loyola, we represented kids that had IEPs, and some of them also had juvenile justice cases. But, it's an issue of kids being diagnosed with things and certain notes being written down about them that then later down the road ends up criminalizing them. And the language that is used is, I don't even think that the mental health workers want to criminalize them. I don't know if it's like, I don't think it's intentional, but I think that the language that they're using, besides it being hurtful and all of those things, is also just damaging to have in records that carry on with them for the rest of their lives. And there's also, I had a client who had mental health issues. He was in foster care, and I don't know what happened in school in his class, but he threatened, he's like, I'm gonna blow up this school. Like, he was in 7th grade. He was not going to blow up the school. Like, he doesn't have the means to blow up the school. It wasn't going to happen. And so he was suspended that day because he was a danger to the school. And then he was suspended, I think, for 2 days. And he came back to school, like, those following days. And then when he came back to school, they sent him to a mental health hospital on a hold, on a 72-hour hold. And I was livid because they were doing that because they wanted to like cover their tracks, or I don't know what they were doing. But I was like, if you were actually concerned that he was a danger to himself, you should have immediately sent him to a mental health hospital and not sent him 3 days later. And so I just think that it goes back to really, you're talking about having it be where, I think, not to be too social workery in a law school, but this is who I always was here, is that you have to go to where the client is at, right? That's what we teach social workers. And so if that is somebody who is having a psychotic break, You need to be able to try and engage us to calm them down. If they are hungry, you need to feed them, whatever the different things are, because you can't like lock them up or arrest them or do any of these or have punitive measures on their school records and all of these things until you really can like address where they're coming from.
Elizabeth, did you want to respond to this? Otherwise, I have another question for you.
I can answer this. I think
Go ahead.
your question was whether or not the system is punitive in nature. Another thought
Can you
I
put
had
the mic a little bit closer?
Sorry, is that, we're talking about clients, especially in this population, clients with mental illness who are incarcerated. Once they're incarcerated, they have a criminal history. They have a conviction history, which then prevents them from accessing resources in the community because they're noted to be violent. They can't get housing and boarding cares, et cetera, because they may have an arson history. They might be sort of a violent crime history. So it's really cyclical, and just by sending him into jail instead of sort of treating him in the first place, you've just sort of sent them on a path to just not have access to resources. So I do see that.
Yeah, and then the other question I wanted to ask you, I know that ODR has made huge strides in terms of getting as many people as you can out of the jails. What do you feel like additional support or services or placements would look like in the county? What's lacking so that you can bring home those other thousands of people that you talked about?
I think that, if you look at the mental health population, there's a really varying degree of acuity in jail, and right now, I think housing at every level is really what we need, and that would include sort of a locked placement. And it's not only to treat the client, but it's also to make sure that sort of it's a collaborative effort, right? We have justice partners. They need to sort of feel like, as Gilbert Wright mentioned, like there's sort of a safety issue. So I think we need locked facilities, but mostly really community-based housing. Like most of these clients can be served like in an open setting in the community, but we just lack the housing. I'm sorry, is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Okay. More, I guess, sort of subacute. Every level you can think of in mental health treatment, if we could put that in the community, that's what we need.
Thank you. Do we have a question? How much time do we have? I don't even know. 5 more minutes?
About 10 more.
Oh, 10 more minutes. Okay. Yes, go ahead.
I'm not directly involved with it, but I've heard that with a lot of the beds opening up in the community, So I'm not directly involved with it, so I apologize if my question is a little naive. But I've heard that a lot of beds in the community, they're dependent upon public-private partnerships with organizations that may want to fill that role, let's say. But then that there might be corruption within those private systems. Is the Office of Diversion and Reentry overseeing those private contractors? What's ensuring that those people are adequately partnered with the system with the same goal?
So I think we're in a really unique position. We work directly with our housing providers. We provide direct monitoring and supervising, so I don't necessarily think that is what's happening in our cases, and I don't really know. Can't speak to that. Can't speak to that. But yeah, so we work with, train, keep in constant contact with our housing providers. We're an agency in office, but we really sort of have our own case, so we follow our clients. We really are invested in our clients, and I can say that confidently.
I'm glad that that's not an issue. Okay.
Got a question back there?
Yeah, this is sort of a reflection on the last panel, but also a question to you. We heard there's one person in the DA's office who's responsible for making all of these decisions about diversion, and then we learned that that one person has zero specialized background and yet says he makes informed decisions, and I find that appalling. So based on that, and I mean this really in a respectful way, do you think that people who work in the DA's office are being exposed to secondary trauma from the work that they perform and are receiving enough care to make good and just decisions?
I can only speak to the cases or the courts that I work out of, the DAs that I work with. To be fair to Mr. Wright, he has no clinical background, but as Vera mentioned, that's really where our program steps in. We're a team of clinicians, and we provide sort of that biopsychosocial assessment approach. We work with these clients in jail. We really get to know the clients. And the beauty of the relationship that we have through our programs, at least, I can't speak to every courthouse is that we've built a relationship where we give our input on the client's history and sort of clinical needs, and the program has grown because they take it and they use it. Do they get secondary trauma? I can't answer that question. I feel like that they're saying yes to a lot more cases than they used to, right? Like, because they're starting to understand the problem more. I know that's not a popular answer, but that's really how I feel.
I want to just push this a little bit more because I think it's a really important area that we need to talk about. So, even though you have the partnership with, really trained expert psychologists, not every courthouse does, right? And so, I'm a former public defender, and I'm in these courthouses with my students now, hearing the DA's arguments, and without mental health training, they come into court and they weigh in on these issues every single day, which affects whether somebody's probation gets violated, for example, which could mean that they go back to jail or prison. Is training the answer to that situation? What's the answer?
So I want to touch it. So the answer is, when we think about mental health, I told you that I was diagnosed with major depression, PTSD, bipolar, polysubstance, I don't know what else. But the most important thing is that I'm capable. I'm capable of doing many things. I am capable. And what we oftentimes think of, and because this is stigma, this is what stigma looks like, that we shouldn't be at the table, that we shouldn't be invited to be a part of the educational piece, to educate and inform those who are making decisions, because we're not all the same. And then the background, where did we come from? What happened? Do you know that every time that I went to jail and was arrested and released from jail back into those streets, nobody ever asked me where I was going, or did I even have a place to go? Nobody ever asked me that. Nobody asked me, why do you keep coming in here? You don't look like you belong here. Nobody asked me. It's just always about seeing us as criminals first. Then we might have a mental health diagnosis. But we are criminals first. And what has to change is we need to be more involved in educating. We need to demand that how the current system is operating around this, and I'm going to turn and talk to you two ladies. Well, we need to demand that changes. That we need to figure out, how do we include people with lived experience who are capable of helping you to better understand from the inside? Because guess what? If you've never been diagnosed with a mental illness, and it doesn't matter what mental illness you've been diagnosed with, or perhaps you are very close and near and dear to a family member, where you've actually seen and you know that that's not a bad person. That's a person who's not having a great day. That's a person who is struggling. That's a person who suffers. I'm trying to understand better what it is that my loved one is going through. Until you have actually been there.
I want to add on to that too, because I think that what we're touching upon is ableism. How are you making decisions without being directly impacted, and we see that in all of, with YJC and with STOP, we see that in a lot of different spaces that we're in, where just like pertaining to use of force, folks are making decisions for families, but families are not sitting at the table. They are not directly impacted, so you have different folks that think that this is what families may want, but it could be the complete opposite. So it's really important to have folks that are directly impacted to be sitting at the table and not be, pass over the mic. Don't speak for folks, I think that, that's one of my biggest things that I want to stress is at the county, state, whatever level that you're looking on, directly impacted folks are not being represented. We're not given a voice. We're not allowed to be up on that platform, and it's so detrimental to other folks. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you. One last question right here.
Thank you so much. Amazing panel. My name is Marissa. I'm with Californians for Safety and Justice, and something Alex just raised, and that seems to be floating around, and something that we ask a lot at Californians for Safety and Justice. It is very important to have people with lived experience at the table, survivors at the table. Often what that looks like is that county agencies ask you to volunteer your time and come to a table. They're getting paid to lead the conversation, and they present you with what they've already designed for your feedback, right? And that's happened at the Alternatives to Incarceration work group. Like, it occurred to them way into the process. We should have a survivor convening. We should have community engagement sessions after we've already come up with 100 recommendations, right? And the fact that it's called the Alternatives to Incarceration work group and not accountability models means we start at incarceration. So my question is, and this has come up with someone in the Department of Public Health here, how can we ask departments, how can we say, listen, for the department that's developing a homeless services program, what percentage of your staff, paid staff, has been homeless? Because if no one is, then your program is worthless. It's what you think we need, and why are we paying you to do that? And honestly, the DAs, there should be way fewer DAs and take that money and way more clinicians and counselors and trauma recovery centers. Like, they should all be working themselves out of a job. And so, like, no DA or public defender or criminal justice system should ever touch someone with a mental health issue at all. So I guess my question is, like, how do we ask to be at the table? We have, honestly, you're preaching to the choir. Who they all left, right? Like, how do we really truly demand system change, and so that the budget of this county, the heart of a county is its budget, and it's soulless and heartless right now. Like, what do we do?
Thank you for that. That's a wonderful last question. Maybe we'll do like 30 seconds each down the line. Ellie, you want to start? Or Elizabeth?
Call your board of supervisors, right? Because they control our budget. And I think right now there's a momentum towards social justice. That's really the only solution I can think of. They control the persons.
Yeah, yes, obviously the board of supervisors, but I was going to mention Californians for Safety and Justice, and it kind of links to your question. And I think that, it's easy, and I know that I have spent many years of my life doing the system is bad, those are bad people. But what I think is, and what you're saying about the DAs and trauma, and I see this I think that there's been a shift in who our police departments are and who our DAs are, and they look a lot like and are coming from similar communities. And so I think that doing trauma work and trying as much as we can to see each other as people and hearing each other out, I know that it seems like I'm being too soft, but I really think that that's important. And then obviously I totally agree with the idea that everybody who needs to have, there should be at every table people with lived experience who are governing it, who are being paid as experts, not just to come to groups.
So there's a beginning everywhere, and when we think about decriminalizing the mentally ill, it's important that we hold the Department of Mental Health accountable for the clients in which they are responsible for. And then it's also important that we hold the criminal justice system to understanding better and more relationships and partnerships. I want to plug something. That, first of all, I want to applaud, and I really appreciate Judge Espinoza. And I especially appreciate Dr. Jonathan Sharon, who is the director of the Department of Mental Health. What the County of Los Angeles and the Department of Mental Health is doing that could support, those of us who are here and care, is what's called Your DMH. And Your DMH is held in every service planning area. And so you can go online, or I'll give you my card. I would love for you to join if you're in Service Area 6, but it happens at every one of our service areas. And it's an opportunity for us to come together and have conversations and also be able to support and bring information back to the Department of Mental Health in reference to what are the community needs. Now, I heard a lot of people, and I see a lot of faces in here that are familiar with me, that are from the COCO. So I would encourage y'all to suit up and to show up, or talk to me about it. But it's important, and I'll tell you why, and I know my 30 seconds is up. It's important because we can keep talking about the problem, But if we keep talking about the problem, we're not talking about the solution. And we need to get out of spaces that are just familiar to us, around certain subject matters, and start to look and explore more about what is mental health, what is mental illness, where are other people who are, professionals or people who have lived experience, who's coming to these tables. Start branching out. And so I encourage you to join me, and I don't even care if it ain't your service area. Come hang out with Reba in Service Area 6. Let's learn something together. Let's make a difference.
Just to answer your question, I would just say simply not to ask and really demand, because these are, your taxpayer, it's your money. These are your departments, so as much as, it's, their job, whatever, this money, we're paying their salaries. So we need to demand to be at that table, and to me, the solution is always, 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 always with community. We know what's best for our community. We know and love our community. It's not the systems, the different systems that are in place. It's always within the community.
All right, let's give a huge round of applause for this amazing panel. Thank you all so much.
Okay, so I should make some closing remarks. I'll keep them very, very brief because I'm sure you want to get away. I learned a huge amount this evening. I think the thing I learn over and over again, especially when we have such a diverse set of panelists, is how important it is for us lawyers to look past the law and to recognize and empower others who have expertise and experience that we as lawyers might lack, and to recognize our own limitations, but also the ways in which we can ally and help. I want to say a special thank you to our partner organizations, to the League of Women Voters, to the American Constitution Society, but especially to the Justice Collaborative. We could not have done this without them, and especially to Julian Calvin Harris, without whom this would not have happened. She's been incredibly enthusiastic and energetic in helping put this program on. But most especially, I want to thank our conference and events organizers here at LMU Loyola Law School, Ashley Hoogworth, Lindsay Hinoyosa, but especially Samantha Caldwell, who has been just an amazing help in making this space available and putting on all the refreshments, coordinating with everyone. It's been a really incredible effort, and we really appreciate it, Samantha. Thank you so much. Finally, thank you to all of you for coming here. I hope you keep coming back to Loyola. You may think that change can't, you haven't empowered people because the main decision makers have left. But I'll tell you, we've got a bunch of great students here who, from just conversations I've had tonight, are energized and enthused and want to reach out. I'm sure the same is true of our audience. So thank you all for being here and participating in this event. Thanks and good night.